The morning sun barely touched the windows of the small white house at 4127 Maple Street when Sarah Thompson opened her eyes. She had been awake for most of the night again, staring at the ceiling and counting the bills in her head. The numbers never seemed to add up right, no matter how many times she went through them. Mark was still sleeping beside her, his breathing heavy and uneven from the medications he had to take after his heart. Surgery 3 months ago, Sarah quietly slipped out of bed and walked to the kitchen. The coffee maker sat empty on the counter because they had run out of coffee 2 days ago. She filled a small pot with water instead and put it on the stove to make tea from the last few tea bags they had left. The kitchen was cold and she pulled her old bathrobe tighter around herself as she waited for the water to boil. The stack of envelopes on the kitchen table seemed to grow bigger every day. Electric bill, gas bill, water bill, medical bills from the hospital, credit card statements, and notices from the bank. Sarah picked up the electric bill and saw the bright red words that made her stomach twist. Final notice, past due amount, $463. Service will be disconnected in 5 days if payment is not received. She heard footsteps on the stairs and quickly put the bill back on the pile. Emma, her 16-year-old daughter, came into the kitchen. Wearing her school uniform, the uniform was getting too small for Emma, but they could not afford a new one. Emma had grown 3 inches in the past year, and the sleeves of her white shirt barely reached her wrists anymore. "Good morning, Mom," Emma said as she opened the refrigerator. There was not much inside. Half a loaf of bread, some peanut butter, a few eggs, and a container of milk that would expire tomorrow. Emma looked at the sparse contents and closed the door without taking anything. "I am not really hungry this morning," Emma said with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "I will just grab something at school." Sarah knew her daughter was lying. Emma had been skipping breakfast for weeks now, always making excuses about not being hungry or running late. The school lunch program helped during the day, but Sarah worried about her children not getting enough food at home. Emma was a smart girl, probably the smartest in her class. But lately she looked tired all the time, and her clothes hung loose on her thin frame. The tea kettle started whistling, and Sarah poured the hot water into 2 cups, adding 1 tea bag. To each, she gave 1 cup to Emma and kept 1 for herself. They sat at the small kitchen table together, both of them quiet and lost in their own thoughts. Jake came running down the stairs next, his backpack bouncing against his back. At 12 years old, Jake was full of energy and always seemed to be in a hurry to get somewhere. He grabbed his jacket from the chair and headed toward the door. "Wait," Sarah called out. "Do you want some breakfast?" Jake stopped and turned around. His eyes went to the refrigerator and then to his mother's face. He could see the worry lines around her eyes and the way she held her teacup with both hands like she was trying to warm herself up. "I already ate something upstairs, Mom," Jake said. "I found some crackers in my room." Sarah knew he was lying too, but she did not say anything. What could she say? That there was no food for breakfast? That she had failed as a mother to provide for her children? Instead, she just nodded and watched her son hurry out the door to catch the school bus. 8-year-old. Sophie came downstairs last, moving slowly and dragging her favorite stuffed rabbit behind her. Sophie had beautiful blonde hair that Sarah still tried to braid every morning, even though they could not afford proper hair ties anymore. Sophie climbed onto her mother's lap and buried her face against Sarah's shoulder. "My tummy hurts, Mommy," Sophie whispered. Sarah felt her heart break. A little more. She knew Sophie's tummy hurt because she was hungry. They'd eaten a small dinner last night, just some rice and vegetables. But it was not enough for a growing 8-year-old girl. "Let me make you some toast, sweetheart," Sarah said, carrying Sophie to the counter. She opened the bread bag and found only 3 slices left. She put 1 slice in the toaster and spread a thin layer of peanut butter on it when it was done. Sophie ate it slowly, making it last as long as possible. Mark finally came downstairs, moving carefully and holding onto the railing. The heart surgery had weakened him, and he tired easily now. He had been out of work for 3 months, and the doctor said he could not return to his job at the construction site. The physical labor would be too much for his heart. "Any word from the job interviews?" Sarah asked quietly while Sophie was getting ready for school. Mark shook his head. He had applied for office jobs, store clerk positions, anything that would not require heavy lifting. But jobs were hard to find in their small town, and most employers wanted someone without health problems. "I have another interview tomorrow at the grocery store," Mark said. "It's just stocking shelves and helping customers." The manager seemed nice when I talked to him yesterday. Sarah nodded and tried to look hopeful, but they both knew that even if Mark got the job, it would pay much less than his construction work. It might not be enough to catch up on all the bills that kept piling up after Sophie left for school. Sarah and Mark sat at the kitchen table looking at the stack of bills. They had been married for 18 years and had always found a way to make things work. Mark had steady work. Sarah had her job at the textile factory, and they had savings for emergencies. But everything changed when the factory closed down and Sarah lost her job. Then Mark's heart attack happened just 2 months later, and their world turned upside down. The medical bills alone were overwhelming. Even with insurance, they owed thousands of dollars to the hospital, the doctors, and the specialists. The medications. Mark needed cost over $200 every month. They had used up all their savings just to pay for the first month of treatment. "We will figure this out," Mark said, reaching across the table to take Sarah's hand. "Always do." Sarah squeezed his hand and nodded, but inside she was scared. Really scared. For the first time in their marriage, she did not know how they were going to make it through. William Martinez stood at his kitchen window watching the Thompson family through the thin morning light. I'd been doing this more often lately, not in a nosy way, but because he was worried about them. His own kitchen was quiet and empty, just the way it had been for the past 2 years since Rosa died. The silence in his house felt heavy, like a blanket that covered everything and made even the smallest sound seem too loud. He watched as Sarah helped little Sophie onto the school bus. The child looked smaller than she should for an 8-year-old, and her winter coat was clearly too big for her. It was probably a hand-me-down from her older sister Emma. William remembered when his own children were small, how Rosa would fuss over them every morning, making sure they had warm clothes and full bellies before they left for school. But that was many years ago, and his children now lived far away with families of their own. The Thompson house looked different lately. William noticed things that other neighbors might miss. The grass was getting longer because their lawnmower had broken and they could not afford to fix it. The paint on their front door was peeling and one of the shutters hung crooked. Small things, but William knew that small things added up when money was tight. He had learned that lesson himself when he was younger and just starting out with Rosa. William walked to his coffee maker and poured himself a cup of black coffee. He had always drunk his coffee black, even when Rosa tried to get him to add cream and sugar. She used to laugh and say he was too stubborn for his own good. Now he drank it black because it reminded him of her laugh and the way she would shake her head at his stubborn ways. After Rosa died, the neighbors had been kind to him. Sarah Thompson had brought him casseroles and soups for weeks after the funeral. The children had drawn him pictures and left them on his doorstep with little notes that said things like, "We miss Mrs. Rosa too, and you are not alone, Mr. William." Emma had even offered to help him with his grocery shopping. Jake had mowed his lawn without being asked. William had tried to pay Jake for mowing the lawn, but the boy had refused to take any money. Instead, Jake had said his mom told him that neighbors help neighbors, and that was payment enough. It was the kind of thing Rosa would have said. It made William's chest feel tight with emotion. Now it was clear that the Thompson family needed help, but William knew them well enough to understand that they would never ask for it. Mark Thompson was a proud man who had always worked hard to provide for his family. Sarah was the same way, always giving to others, but never wanting to take anything in return. William respected that pride because he had the same kind of pride himself. The problem was figuring out how to help them without hurting their feelings or making them feel like charity cases. William had some money saved up from his years of working at the steel mill. Rosa had been good with money, and they had lived simply, saving what they could for their retirement. After she died, William kept working because he did not know what else to do with himself. The house felt too empty and quiet when he was home alone. William finished his coffee and walked out to his garage. This was where he spent most of his time now, working with his hands the way his father had taught him. When he was a boy, his father had been a carpenter and had shown William how to work with wood, how to measure twice and cut once. how to sand a piece of furniture until it was smooth as silk. The garage was full of William's projects. He had started woodworking, again after Rosa died, partly to keep his hands busy and partly to quiet his mind. There were small tables, chairs, picture frames, and jewelry boxes scattered around the workspace. Some were finished, and some were still waiting for him to complete them. William picked up a piece of sandpaper and started working on a small cabinet he had been making. The repetitive motion of sanding was soothing to him. As he worked, he thought about the Thompson family and what he could do to help them. Direct help would be rejected, he was sure of that. But maybe there was another way. He thought about Emma, who was smart and hard-working, but looked tired all the time now. He thought about Jake, who had always been cheerful and energetic, but seemed more serious lately. Little Sophie, who used to run and play in the yard but now moved more slowly, like she did not have enough energy for running and playing. William had seen Mark Thompson talking to other men in the neighborhood, probably asking about job opportunities. He had watched Sarah walking to the bus stop instead of driving her car, which meant they probably could not afford gas anymore. These were small signs. But William had lived long enough to recognize them as he continued sanding the cabinet. An idea began to form in William's mind. It was not a complete plan yet, just the beginning of one, but it felt like the right direction, the kind of idea that Rosa would have approved of. She had always believed that helping others was not about making yourself feel good, but about doing what was right even when no one was watching. William set down his sandpaper and looked around his garage workshop. There were tools here that had belonged to his father and tools he had bought over the years. There was lumber stacked against one wall, pieces of oak and pine and maple that he had been collecting for various projects. And there was time, lots of time, because his evenings and weekends stretched out, empty and quiet. Maybe, William thought, there was a way to turn his time and his skills and his empty evenings into something that could help the Thompson family. In careful work, but William had never been afraid of hard work. Rosa used to say that he was like a dog with a bone when he set his mind to something, and maybe that stubborn determination could be useful now. William picked up his sandpaper again and went back to work on the cabinet. But now his mind was busy with possibilities and plans. For the first time since Rosa died, he felt like he had a purpose beyond just getting through each day. The cold Tuesday morning in November arrived like a punch to the stomach for the Thompson family. Sarah woke up shivering and realized immediately that something was wrong. The house felt different, colder than it should even for late autumn. She reached over to touch the radiator next to their bed and found it completely cold. No warmth, no familiar humming sound, nothing. Mark was already awake. Sitting on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands, he had heard the silence too, the absence of the heating system that usually kept their home warm. Without saying a word, both of them knew what had happened. The gas company had finally made good on their threats. Sarah pulled on her robe and slippers and hurried downstairs. The kitchen was freezing cold, and her breath made small clouds in the air. On the front door, she found exactly what she expected to find, but had been dreading for weeks. A bright yellow notice taped to the glass that read "Service disconnected. Due to non-payment." The words seemed to jump off the paper and hit her in the face. She read the notice 3 times, hoping the words would change somehow. Past due amount $812. Service will be restored when full payment is made, plus reconnection fees. Contact customer service to arrange payment. The paper crinkled in her shaking hands as she tried to process what this meant for her family. Mark came downstairs a few minutes later, moving slowly and carefully as he always did now. He saw the notice in Sarah's hands and did not need to ask what it said. He took the paper from her and read it himself, his face growing pale as he looked at the numbers. $800, he said quietly, plus whatever the reconnection fees. Sarah nodded, unable to speak. $800 might as well have been $8,000. They had exactly $43 in their checking account and no credit cards that were not already maxed out. Mark's next unemployment check would not come for another week, and it would barely cover their grocery money. The children started coming downstairs for breakfast, and Sarah and Mark quickly hid the notice. They tried to act normal, but Emma noticed, Immediately, that something was wrong. She was smart and observant, and she had been watching her parents carefully for months now. "Why is it so cold in here?" Emma asked, wrapping her arms around herself. "The heater's having some problems," Mark said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We are going to get it fixed today." Jake came bouncing down the stairs in his usual energetic way, but he stopped short when he felt how cold the kitchen was. He looked at his parents and then at Emma, and Sarah could see him putting the pieces together in his 12-year-old mind. Little Sophie appeared last, wrapped in her favorite pink blanket and dragging her stuffed rabbit. She climbed onto Sarah's lap and snuggled against her mother's chest, seeking warmth and comfort. "Mommy, I am cold," Sophie whispered. Sarah felt her heart break into 1,000 pieces, wrapped her arms around her youngest daughter, and tried to think of what to say. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that you cannot afford to keep the house warm? How do you tell a child that you have failed at the most basic job of a parent, which is to provide shelter and safety? "We are going to have an adventure today," Sarah said, forcing cheerfulness into her voice. "We're going to pretend we are camping inside the house." Emma and Jake exchanged glances. They were old enough to understand that this was not really an adventure, but they played along for Sophie's sake. They helped their mother gather blankets and pillows and made a fort in the living room around the fireplace. Mark went outside to look for wood that they could burn to create some heat. The fireplace had not been used in years, but Mark managed to get it working after cleaning out the chimney and checking that everything was safe. He found some old newspapers and kindling wood in the garage, and soon they had a small fire crackling in the hearth. It was not much, but it was better than nothing. The family spent the morning huddled together around the fire, playing board games and trying to stay warm. Sarah made hot tea and heated up some soup on the stove, which still worked because it ran on electricity rather than gas. They shared the soup from one big pot, taking turns with the spoons and pretending it was a fun family tradition. But as the day went on, reality set in. The fire only warmed the living room, and the rest of the house remained freezing cold. The children's bedrooms upstairs were too cold to sleep in. The bathroom was so cold that taking a shower was almost impossible, and they only had enough wood to keep the fire going for maybe 2 more days. Emma pulled her mother aside when the younger children were distracted by a puzzle. "Mom," she said quietly, "how bad is it really?" Sarah looked at her 16-year-old daughter and saw an adult looking back at her. Emma had been forced to grow up too fast over the past few months, and Sarah hated that she had to burden her child with adult worries. "It is pretty bad," Sarah admitted, "but we will figure something out." "We always do." Emma nodded, but Sarah could see the fear in her eyes. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Sarah and Mark sat by the dying fire and faced the truth of their situation. They were out of options. The savings were gone, the credit cards were maxed out, and Mark's job prospects were still uncertain. "Tomorrow, I will call the gas company and try to work out a payment plan," Mark said. "Maybe they will turn the heat back on if we can pay something." Sarah nodded, but they both knew it was unlikely. The gas company had already sent multiple notices and had been patient longer than they had to be. $800 was $800. And payment plans were not easy to get when you had no steady income. As they sat in the darkness, listening to the wind outside and feeling the cold seep through the walls, Sarah wondered how they had gotten to this point. They'd always been responsible people, always paid their bills on time, always lived within their means. But sometimes life hits you with more than you can handle. And being responsible is not enough. That night, the family slept together in the living room, sharing blankets and body heat around the fireplace. It was uncomfortable and scary, but they were together, and that was something. Outside, the November wind howled and rattled the windows, but inside, the Thompson family held on to each other and tried to believe that somehow things would get better. Emma Thompson had always been a good student, but now she was sitting in her math class, staring at the problems on the page without really seeing them. Her mind was somewhere else, calculating different numbers. $43 in the checking account. $800 needed for the gas bill. Groceries for the week would cost at least $60. Her father's unemployment, check was $180 when it came. The numbers never worked out right no matter how. Many times, she added, and subtracted them in her head. Emma had been doing this kind of math for weeks now, ever since she overheard her parents talking late at night about money. She knew they tried to hide their worries from the children, but Emma was 16, and she was not blind. When the final bell rang, Emma did not go straight home like she usually did. Instead, she walked to the shopping center near the school and started going into stores. She asked the same question at each place. "Are you hiring? Do you need any part-time help after school?" She had her birth certificate and social security card in her backpack, ready to fill out applications. Most of the store managers were kind, but said they were not hiring right now. The grocery store manager said she could put in an application and they would call if anything opened up. The fast food restaurant said they might have something in a few weeks, but could not promise anything. Emma filled out applications anyway, writing her information carefully and trying to look older than 16. Meanwhile, Jake Thompson was at school having his own ideas about helping his family. During lunch, he spread out his baseball card collection on the cafeteria table. These cards had been his pride and joy for 3 years. He had some rare ones that his grandfather had given him, and some newer ones that he had bought with birthday, money, and allowance. His friend Tommy looked at the cards with interest. Jake had shown them to Tommy many times before, but never offered to sell them. "How much do you want for the whole collection?" Tommy asked. Jake's throat felt tight. These cards meant everything to him. He knew which players were on which teams, what their statistics were, and how much each card was worth. But he also knew that his family needed money more than he needed baseball cards. $50 for everything, Jake said quietly. Tommy's eyes got wide. He knew the collection was worth more than that, probably closer to $100. But $50 was all the money Tommy had saved from his allowance. "Deal," Tommy said, pulling out his wallet. Jake carefully packed up his cards and handed them to his friend. The $50 felt heavy in his pocket as he walked home from school. It was not much, but it was something. Maybe his parents could use it to buy groceries or put gas in the car. Little Sophie had her own plan, though it was much simpler than her older siblings' efforts. She sat at the kitchen table after school with a box of crayons and a stack of construction paper. Sophie loved to draw. Her pictures usually covered the refrigerator and the walls of her bedroom. But today she was drawing with a purpose. She made pictures of flowers and rainbows and happy faces. She drew her family holding hands and smiling. She drew their house with hearts floating above it. Each picture was bright and cheerful, filled with the kind of hope that only an 8-year-old can create. When she finished each drawing, Sophie wrote a price on the back. 25 cents. She had no idea if that was too much or too little, but it seemed like a good number to her. She put all the pictures in a small box and walked to the house next door. Mrs. Henderson was an elderly woman who lived alone and always had a kind word for the neighborhood children. Doran saw Sophie standing there with her box of pictures. Her face lit up with a smile. "I am selling my artwork," Sophie announced proudly. "They are 25 cents each, and they are all very beautiful." Mrs. Henderson looked through the pictures carefully, making appreciative comments about each one. "Oh, this flower is lovely. Look at this rainbow. You're such a talented artist." Mrs. Henderson, bought 4 pictures for $1, and Sophie felt like she had just made the biggest business deal of her life. She went to 3 more houses on their street and sold 6 more pictures. By the time she went home, she had $2.50 in her small purse. That evening, the Thompson family gathered around their fireplace again. The fire was smaller tonight because they were trying to make their wood last longer. They had pushed their mattresses downstairs so everyone could sleep in the warm living room together. Emma was the first to speak up about her activities that day. She pulled out the job applications she had filled out and showed them to her parents. "I applied for work at 6 different places today," she said. "Someone is bound to hire me soon." Mark and Sarah looked at their daughter with a mixture of pride and sadness. They were proud that she wanted to help, but sad that she felt she had to. 16-year-olds should be worried about homework and friends, not about paying the family bills. Before they could respond, Jake pulled out his $50 and placed it on the coffee table. I sold my baseball card collection to Tommy, he said. I know it is not a lot, but maybe it can help with something. Sarah felt tears start to form in her eyes. Those baseball cards had been Jake's most prized possession. She knew how much they meant to him and how hard it must have been to let them go. Finally, Sophie opened her little purse and proudly dumped out her earnings from her art sales. I made $2.50 selling my pictures, she announced. Mrs. Henderson said I'm going to be a famous artist someday. The parents looked at their 3 children and felt overwhelmed by their love and sacrifice. Here were their babies, trying to solve adult problems with their childhood resources. Emma with her job applications, Jake with his baseball cards, Sophie with her crayon drawings. Mark cleared his throat and tried to speak, but his voice came out rough with emotion. You kids are amazing, he finally managed to say. But this is not your job. Your job is to be kids and go to school and not worry about these things. But we are a family, Emma said firmly. And families help each other. That night, as the family settled down to sleep around the fireplace, Sarah and Mark lay awake long after the children were breathing peacefully. The $52.50 that their children had earned was sitting on the table, and while it was a beautiful gesture, it was nowhere near enough to solve their problems. But somehow, seeing their children's determination and love had given them a different kind of strength. They were not alone in this struggle. They had each other, and maybe that was enough to keep fighting for one more day. William Martinez had been watching everything unfold from his kitchen window for weeks now. He saw the utility truck that came to disconnect the gas service. He noticed the family gathering firewood from their backyard. He watched Emma walking home from school later than usual, probably stopping to look for work. He saw Jake carrying a box to his friend's house and coming back empty-handed, but with his shoulders set in a determined way. Most of all, William saw little Sophie going door to door with her box of drawings, trying to help her family the only way an 8-year-old knew how. When she knocked on his door that afternoon, William's heart nearly broke. She stood there so proud and serious, explaining about her artwork business, with the confidence of someone much older. William bought 3 of her pictures for $1 each, even though she was only asking for 25 cents. Sophie tried to give him change from her little purse, but William told her that the extra money was because her art was so special. The smile on her face when she skipped back to her house was both beautiful and heartbreaking. That evening, William sat in his garage workshop with his tools spread out around him. For the past 3 weeks, he had been working on something special every night after dinner. The project had started as just an idea, but now it was taking real shape. He had been planning and measuring and cutting and sanding, working by the light of his old desk lamp until late into the night. On his workbench were 5 pieces of furniture, in various stages of completion. A dining table made from solid oak that he had been saving for years, for matching chairs with curved backs and comfortable seats. A hope chest made from beautiful cherry wood that Rosa had always admired. Each piece was crafted with the kind of attention to detail that his father had taught him when William was just a boy. The dining table was nearly finished. William ran his hand over the smooth surface, feeling for any rough spots that needed more sanding. The wood was warm under his palm and had a rich golden color that came from hours of careful work. This table would last for generations if it was taken care of properly. The chairs were more complicated because they had to be exactly the right height. It's an angle for comfort. William had made and remade the seats 3 times until they felt just right. Each chair had to be perfect because families spent so much time sitting around their table together. Meals and homework and conversations and games all happened around the family table. The hope chest was William's favorite piece. Rosa had always wanted one, and he had promised to make her one for their bedroom. But life got busy with work and raising children, and somehow he never found the time. After she died, William started the hope chest as a way to keep his promise to her, even though she was gone.
Ow.
Now it would serve a different purpose. But William thought Rosa would approve. But the furniture was only part of William's plan, hidden. Inside the hope chest was an envelope containing $2,000 in cash. This was money that William had been saving for years, money that he and Rosa had put aside for their retirement. After Rosa died, William kept working at the steel mill, even though he was old enough to retire. He did not need much money for himself, living alone in his small house, eating simple meals, and having few expenses. William had thought long and hard about what Rosa would want him to do with their savings. She had always been generous with their neighbors, always the first to help when someone was in trouble. During her illness, the Thompson family had been so kind to them both. Sarah brought meals when Rosa was too weak to cook. The children drew pictures and brought flowers from their garden. Mark helped William with repairs around the house that he could not manage alone. Now it was William's turn to help. But he knew the Thompson family well enough to know they would never accept charity. Mark Thompson was a proud man who had always worked hard to provide for his family. Sarah was the same way, always giving to others, but reluctant to accept help for herself. They would refuse money if William offered it directly, but this plan was different. William was not offering charity. He was offering family, helping family, the way Rosa would have wanted it. The furniture would give them something beautiful and useful for their home. The money would help them get back on their feet without feeling like they were taking handouts. William picked up his sandpaper and continued working on the table's surface. Each stroke of the sandpaper brought him closer to finishing his project. He thought about the Thompson children and how they had been trying so hard to help their parents. Emma with her job applications, Jake selling his precious baseball cards, and little Sophie with her artwork. These children understood what family meant, just like Rosa had always taught their own children. The work was hard on William's aging hands, but it felt good to have a purpose again. For 2 years since Rosa died, he had been just going through the motions of living, getting up each morning, going to work, coming home to an empty house, eating dinner alone, going to bed in a room that felt too quiet. But now he had something important to do, something that would make a real difference. As William worked, he could almost feel Rosa's presence in the garage with him. She had always loved watching him work with his hands, and she would sit in an old chair in the corner while he built shelves for their home or repaired furniture for the neighbors. Sometimes she would hand him tools or hold pieces of wood while he measured and cut. Other times, she would just sit quietly and keep him company while he worked. William knew that Rosa would approve of what he was doing. She had always believed that love was something you did, not just something you felt. Love was bringing soup to a sick neighbor. Love was mowing someone's lawn without being asked. Love was using your skills and your resources to help people who were struggling, especially when they were too proud to ask for help themselves. The next morning would be Thanksgiving, and William had decided that was the perfect day to give his gift to the Thompson family. It seemed right somehow, giving thanks by sharing what he had with people who needed it. Rosa had always made their Thanksgiving meals special, and even though she was gone, William could still make this Thanksgiving special for someone else. The morning before Thanksgiving arrived, gray and cold, with frost covering the windows and a bitter wind that rattled the bare branches of the trees. The Thompson family woke up in their living room again, huddled together under every blanket they owned. The fire had died down to just glowing embers during the night, and the house felt colder than ever. Sarah was the first to wake up, and she lay quietly for a few minutes listening to her family breathing around her. Mark was still, sleeping heavily, exhausted from another restless night of worry. Emma was curled up between her younger siblings, one arm protectively around Sophie. Jake was sprawled out like he always slept, taking up more space than seemed possible for a 12-year-old boy. Tomorrow was supposed to be Thanksgiving, but Sarah could not imagine what they would have to be thankful for. The refrigerator was nearly empty. They had no heat, and the stack of bills on the kitchen table seemed to grow taller every day. She had called the gas company yesterday to beg for more time, but the customer service representative had been polite but firm. Full payment plus reconnection fees or no service. Sarah carefully got up without waking the others and went to the kitchen to make tea. The window over the sink was covered with ice crystals, and she could see her breath in the cold air. She waited for the water to boil. She noticed movement in William's yard next door. He was up early, moving around in his garage with the door open despite the cold weather. William had been such a good neighbor over the years, especially after his wife Rosa died. Sarah often thought about him living alone in that quiet house, and she worried that he was lonely. The children had been drawing him pictures and bringing him cookies when they could. But lately Sarah had been too focused on her own family's problems to check on him properly. The tea kettle whistled softly, and Sarah poured hot water over the last tea bag they had in the house. She wrapped her hands around the warm cup and tried to think about what they could do for Thanksgiving dinner. Maybe they could make a simple meal with whatever was left in the cupboards. The children deserved something special, even if money was tight. A soft knock on the front door interrupted her thoughts. Sarah looked at the clock and saw that it was barely 7 in the morning. Who would be visiting so early? She walked to the door and looked through the peephole to see William. Standing on her porch, his face looked different somehow, like he was nervous but also excited about something. Sarah opened the door and was surprised to see tears in William's eyes. He was a strong man who rarely showed emotion, but this morning he looked like he was struggling to keep his feelings under control. "Good morning, Sarah," William said, his voice a little shaky. "I need you to wake up your family and come with me. All of you. There is something I need to show you." Sarah was confused, but she could see that whatever William wanted was important to him. She nodded and went to wake up Mark and the children. They got dressed quickly, curious about what their neighbor could want so early in the morning. The whole family followed William across their yard to his garage. The morning air was so cold that their breath made clouds, and Sophie held tight to her mother's hand. William stopped in front of his garage door and turned to face them. "Before I show you what is inside," William said, "I want you to know that this is not charity. This is family taking care of family. Got you. You took care of Rosa and me when we needed it most, and now it is my turn to take care of you." Mark started to say something, but William held up his hand. "Please," William said. "Just let me do this. Rosa would have wanted me to do this." William reached down and slowly opened the garage door. The Thompson family stood, frozen in shock at what they saw inside. The garage had been transformed into a beautiful furniture showroom. There was a gorgeous dining table made from rich golden oak for matching chairs with perfectly carved backs, and a stunning hope chest made from dark cherry wood. But what made them all gasp was not just the furniture itself, but the quality of the work. Every piece was crafted with incredible skill and attention to detail. The wood was sanded smooth as silk and finished with a warm glow that seemed to come from deep inside the grain. These were not just pieces of furniture, they were works of art. William walked over to the dining table and picked up an envelope that was taped to the surface. His hands were shaking as he held it out to Mark. "This is for you," William said. "All of it." "The furniture and what is in this envelope?" Mark took the envelope with trembling fingers and opened it. Inside were $2,100 bills and a handwritten note. Mark read the note out loud, his voice breaking with emotion. "Rosa, always, said that love multiplies when you share it. She would have wanted me to share this with the family who shared their love with us. This is not charity. This is family, taking care of family. Use this money to get back on your feet, and when you are able, pass the kindness on to someone else who needs it." The Thompson family stood in stunned silence, looking at the beautiful furniture and the money that would solve their immediate problems. Emma was the first to move, walking over to William and throwing her arms around him in a tight hug. Then Jake joined them, and then Sophie. And finally, Mark and Sarah. They all stood there in William's garage, crying and hugging and saying thank you over and over again. William was crying too, harder than he had cried since Rosa's funeral. ... These were good tears. Tears of joy and love, and the deep satisfaction of knowing that he had done the right thing. For the first time since Rosa died, William felt her presence strongly around him. He knew she was smiling, proud of what he had accomplished with his hands and his heart. The loneliness that had been his constant companion for 2 years felt lighter somehow, replaced by the warmth of being part of a family again. The Thompson children spent the rest of the morning running their hands over the smooth wood of the furniture and marveling at the beautiful craftsmanship. They had never owned anything so fine. They promised William they would take good care of everything. That afternoon, Mark called the gas company and arranged to pay the bill in full. By evening, their house was warm again. The family gathered around their new dining table for a simple but wonderful Thanksgiving dinner. William joined them, and for the first time in 2 years, it He was not alone on the holiday, as they sat around the table holding hands and saying what they were thankful for. William looked at each face in the warm lamplight and knew that Rosa had been right. Love really did multiply when you shared it, and sometimes the greatest gift you could give was not just money or furniture, the knowledge that someone cared enough to help when help was needed most.